Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm your host, Jessica Neal, along with my co-host, Jeff Markowitz. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing today?
All right. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I just thought of something on the fly. I think you should introduce our guest because you know him so well. So do you want to introduce our guest today since you invited him to the show?
I'm happy to. I'm not really good on the fly, so this may sound a little awkward, but happy
You
to.
are good on the fly. Don't sell yourself short.
All right, good. Well, everybody meet John Lilly. John is a longtime friend and colleague. John is from San Antonio, where Jessica now lives. And John was the CEO of Mozilla, among other things. And, then John went to Greylock and we worked together at Greylock. And John's made a lot of great investments and he's been a great leader in companies. And welcome, John. Great having you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jessica. It's nice to be here. I'd be excited to talk about work.
Yeah. Well, I think you have had like a front row seat at like every level of the ecosystem, like you've been a CEO, you've been a board member, you've been an investor. You've just worn so many
Scientist too.
hats.
The
Yeah.
senior scientist.
Yeah.
Senior scientist. Yes. Remind everybody where that was.
It was at Apple when I just got out of school. My
Yeah.
job was a senior scientist. And I remember like my grandmother, who used to send me like cards and Valentine's Day, and she'd put $2 in them. And then I gave her my business card one time. So I was kind of proud it had an apple on it. And she's like, I've been giving $2 to a senior scientist.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of just
You
a
don't
goofy
need that.
title at Apple. No,
You don't need that money anymore.
no.
No. So how big was Apple at that time?
Apple, so that was call it 1997, and it was right before Steve came back, and I think we were probably 10,000 employees, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
But the
huge.
crazy thing is that because Steve came back when we bought Next, and
Right.
which was like his company had started kind of as like a reaction to getting fired from Apple, more or less, and it wasn't a successful company, but he came back and became the CEO, and it was a crazy time because like the market cap was $2 billion. $2 billion with a B, $2 billion. And like, that's about the cash we had on hand. So I think we were trading below book, and like people thought we were going to be bought by Sun or somebody else then, but it's a long time ago, 1997.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, we like to go back in time. We kind of are, but how did this start from senior scientist to where you are now? What was the path? Tell us the story.
Was it a path
Yeah,
or was it a plan or a path?
No, neither one. So like, I tell people a lot, like I can never tell. My decision making is fine. I think everybody's decision making, the best hitters hit about 300, something like that, in the big leagues. And I've always thought that it's hard to tell which decisions you're making, even and make good ones along the way. And so the only thing I ever knew how to do was like make sure I could find really good people and be around those people. And if you're around good people consistently, then like all good decisions, bad decisions, the outcomes all get better. And so I think thankfully, like I came out here to Stanford. Like Jeff said, I grew up in San Antonio, and I was like the kid of an Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force for 22 years. We were definitely middle class, moved around the country, and I was thinking about going to college. I went to Stanford because my granddad, who just encouraged me to get out of my comfort zone. And I almost ignored him, but I didn't. And I came out to Stanford, and it was a special time. Like the early 90s was right when the internet was kind of getting started. Like, I think, I got a demo of the World Wide Web, when I was a junior in college. It was just a pretty interesting time. And I came out here and I was going to be a physicist or something like that. And I got crushed in the first physics class I took, like absolutely crushed. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I found my way to computer science, which I loved. Like I had done computers a little bit when I was a kid, and I just had a good time. And there was just like a lot of smart people doing it. And then I found my way to this other thing, which was like computers, but designing user interfaces. And so I had internships with some people who had worked at Apple and other places. And I had these two professors, Terry Winograd and then David Kelly, who started IDEO, like who were like the ground zero of what became user interface design, UI. And so I started doing UI, and I was in love with it because like we were making more and more computers, but they were kind of hard to use. And this is the Windows era and all that stuff. And so I just thought it was cool to make things that people liked and people enjoyed. And I thought computing was going to change the world back then. And obviously it has. But so I found my way through that stuff. I went to a company called Trilogy, my first startup in 1995 in Austin. So I learned a lot about enterprise software and selling and that kind of stuff. Cause I'm an introvert engineer by nature. And so like learning how to sell and talk to customers and that kind of thing was a big,
Yeah.
revelation for me. It's still hard for me. Jeff's an extrovert and talks to everyone, but like for me, I'm a little bit of an introvert,
I'm definitely an
a lot of an
introvert.
introvert.
I had to train myself
Are
to
you?
I
not be.
think,
You well, that's what I did too, is like you have to teach yourself. It's like, well, you decide you'd rather be successful than comfortable eventually. And so you have to learn how to be an extrovert to be
yeah,
successful. So anyway, so I did all that stuff, and then I missed being in Silicon Valley. I came back here to Apple, and that's probably when Steve came back. And then I started my own company in 1998 that we got funding from a guy named Mitch Kapor, who's the founder
Reactivity.
of Lotus and Reactivity. That's it. And then Peter Fenton was, because I knew him from school. So Peter and Mitch, and Peter's now at Benchmark, and, famous investor. They invested, and we kind of went through the ups of the .com boom and then the crash, and then eventually sold that company to Cisco. And then I joined Mozilla in the late 2005 to 2010. I was at Mozilla and we become CEO there. We went from like 12 people and no users to, about 400 million users and quarter of the internet going through
yeah. No,
Firefox.
you scaled that company
Yep. And
tremendously. Yeah.
yeah, and that was fun. It was kind of weird. It was an open source nonprofit. So it's very different than the rest of Silicon Valley at the time. And then I was at Greylock
Right.
with Jeff for 10 years in the 2010s. We can talk about that too. Yeah. And then fast forward to COVID and other stuff. And now I do a variety of things we can talk about.
COVID.
Yeah.
I
So
know.
John,
Darn COVID, man.
so
Go ahead,
I was
Jeff.
going to say, I did my research actually. So you talk a lot about like what the alpha nerds adopt.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff that the alpha nerds probably adopt doesn't go anywhere, just the nature of tech. But there are things that the alpha nerds adopt that end up being very interesting businesses. So you were involved with a bunch, but two of them, Figma and Instagram, have been great successes. So like, was that a gut thing with them, or could you articulate why they were different?
Yeah. And also, can you tell the listeners what the definition of an alpha nerd is?
Yeah. I mean, alpha nerds, like, I think maybe Tim O'Reilly coined this term. So Tim O'Reilly also coined the term Web 2.0. He had a big publishing company that almost everybody bought their books to learn how to code. And he's a good friend now. He helped start Code for America, where I was on the board. So Tim defined alpha nerds like these are the people who are the most technical, who are exploring and looking around and trying new things out. In the 90s, they were like the guy at MIT who's like all cyberpunked up, and he'd have a camera mounted on his head and like a big display in front of him, and like he'd be wearing a laptop around to like record all his information. And obviously that future didn't happen, but parts of it did. As we get to these like snap spectacles or AR goggles now, like 25 years later, like he was a nerd then, he's probably a nerd now, but like he could see the future a little bit in little pieces. And Tim at O'Reilly, he's like, well, I'm just going to follow the alpha nerds around. Whatever they're interested in, I'm going to go do. And obviously the things that people are doing now around generative AI and OpenClaw and things like that are the center of gravity now. For me, I mean, Jeff, you're asking about a couple of investments I did at Figma at Greylock. So I think I did Instagram in maybe 2012, 2013, and Figma in 2014. And those are both they're both special companies, special organizations, and led by special people. So Instagram was started by Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, and that was interesting because a friend of mine named Eric Chang was one of the world's best underwater digital photographers. So he'd be this guy who was playing with digital cameras in like 2008, something like that. And he would go scuba diving and like reef diving and sharks, and he had all these pictures of digital pictures of fish and whales and whatnot. And I remember going out to lunch with him one time. He's like, "Oh, let me show you what I'm doing now." And he pulled out Instagram and he started scrolling through his Instagram pictures. And it was weird. This was before Instagram blew up. And it was weird because he's got all these incredibly high definition, high quality pictures. And I thought of Instagram as like, well, I just put my picture up and I put a picture of my kid or the garden up, and I put this filter, this shitty looking filter on it to make it look kind of cool or, old timey or whatever. And so at some level, Instagram, like the filters, you kind of scratched up your picture to make all the pictures look kind of artsy. And you put them up. But Eric, I'm like, why do you do that? You don't need to do that. Your pictures are already beautiful. Why would you put them on this platform for weird filters? He's like, well, it's not about the filters for me. It's about the network. And when I post, I always needed to go to Facebook and MySpace and my email list, and I have to send out all these ways. Whereas on Instagram, I just connect those networks up. I post on Instagram and it gets automatically distributed to all my networks. And that was like a huge aha for me. One of our partners at Greylock's guy named Reid Hoffman, who, started LinkedIn, but obviously has done a lot of thinking about networks and how network effects work. And it's hard to be a partner with Reid and not like just obsess about how things grow and how things distribute. And so you go there and you hear my friend who's a semi-pro photographer talking about this shitty little app, but the power of distribution, like, that I get that. That's not about filters. It's about how do you build networks? How do you share? How do people share with you? And then I started chasing Kevin Systrom, the founder. And so like, I remember we chased them for 6 months because like they were like 8 people, 9 people, and they didn't really need money. They were growing like crazy. And I said, well, you got to take our money. And I introduced them to Reid and our other partner, David Z. And I was like, here's all the famous people we know. And he's like, what I really need is a network engineer. I'm like, okay, well, let's work on it. And then, one of our colleagues at Greylock, Dan Portillo, he found him a network engineer. And Kevin's like, well, I need to raise money now. I want to take your money because you guys helped me find.
And your timing was impeccable.
Perfect.
And yeah, it was perfect. Yeah, we invested at $500 million valuation. We went through a super high growth period, and then while we were doing legal and docs and that kind of stuff, I think we wired the money on a Thursday. Kevin called me that Sunday, 3 days later, and said, hey, funny story. We're selling to Facebook for $1.2 billion. And so it's like a four day flip in a double. When it was a funny thing. Yeah, we had our LP meeting, our limited partner meeting after that. And I said, look, I'm not going to apologize for doubling our money. This is not exactly what we're trying to do, but we were trying to do like 10 times or 1,000 times, but It did okay. Yeah. And so that was just like, I noticed people using it. And then Kevin and Mikey were both clearly special guys. And then the product just felt real good to me. Like it just felt designed, felt like they understood users and understood networks. So that was Instagram. Figma was a little different. I got introduced to Figma. I mean, I think you've had this experience too, Jeff, where, at the same time, like 4 or 5 people in your network who you all trust, you trust them all. They all say, you got to meet this person. And in this case, they said, you got to meet this kid because Dylan, I think, was 19. So Dylan Field, the founder of Figma. And it was DJ Patil and Jeff Weiner and I think John Doerr introduced them. And so like some very like heavy hitter people said, you got to meet this 19-year-old. And so he came over and showed me this thing they had built, which was basically like Photoshop in a browser. He and his co-founder, Evan Wallace, had built. And it was down at the Starbucks a couple of blocks from me in Palo Alto. And we met on a Sunday morning. And he showed it to me and it was amazing. But then I kind of hurt his feelings. I'm like, well, that's cool, but who cares? Photoshop is free, LMS is free. It's not a business. And so I felt bad about it because his face fell and like he was very disappointed. And like, because he was showing me all this stuff that he had built in the browser using a lot of technologies we had built in Mozilla. And so I think he was just wanted me to be excited about it. And I thought it was cool. I just didn't think it mattered very much. And so, but I also thought he was awesome. And so he's like, well, okay, that's disappointing, but like, can we have breakfast in 6 weeks and just chat some more? And so I said, of course, because awesome person, clearly going to be interesting over time. And plus I just like talking to him because he's interested in the same things I was. I mean, he's 20 years younger than me, but he's a lot of overlapping interests in design and software and how people make things and stuff like that. And he's fun. And so we met and, it's like there's some people that like that, and you go in with a list of things to talk about at breakfast, and you talk for 2 hours, then your list is longer at the end of breakfast, not shorter. And he was just always amazing. He'd say, well, I'm doing this. I'm like, well, you should talk to this person or that person. And one of the people I suggested he talk to was like the the CEO of Adobe, who was like the former CEO of Adobe, Bruce
Yeah.
Chisholm, who's like probably 75, 80 years old at the time. And so I'm like, well, he'll have opinions on this. And then Dylan, like 6 weeks later, we had breakfast. He's like, okay, I talked to Bruce. I'm like, well, how'd you do that? And he's like, well, I asked this person to this person. I got issues this person. And I went and saw him. And here's what he said. And here's what this person who's like 50 years older than me said. And based on this, I agree with 30% of it and I disagree with 70% of it. And here's why. And you know, somebody does that, you're like, that's a guy that I want to work with for a long time because he follows up, he learns, he asks good questions, he's not defensive. It's amazing set
John,
of stuff.
oh,
Yeah.
go ahead,
I
Jessica.
mean,
Sorry.
go. No, go.
So those are two really interesting kind of cases. One has gone through the IPO process. The other one, didn't, but built, a phenomenal business that everybody uses and product that everybody uses, I should say. There are so many situations where we have entrepreneurs that are backed. And I remember having these conversations within Greylock a bunch of times where it's like, that one probably won't make it. And then you have entrepreneurs where you say, well, they probably will make it. And I remember when you saw Dylan, you didn't know for sure, but you had a pretty good hunch that he was going to make it. How did you know that? Or how did you think that?
Well,
that's a long journey.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. Yeah. It was a long time. It was 10 years, 15 years. I don't know. So, but you remember it wasn't a widely held view within the partnership. There were people in a partnership who thought we should replace Dylan. Number one, thought we shouldn't invest. And then later, a couple years on, it's like, well, if he's not going to make it, then we should replace him. And for me, there were a couple of signs. There were some obvious signs, and there were some gut feelings for me. So the obvious signs were he recruited quite senior people, even as a 8-person startup in Palo Alto. They were in this crappy little office, and he recruited people out of Adobe who had been there 20 years and worked on stuff. And that's a pretty interesting signal. So being able to get people to leave their, $1 million a year jobs to go work for a crappy startup is a big thing. The second thing, and then he also was able to collect a lot of interesting people around him, a lot of talent around him. This thing that I talked about going to find Bruce Chisholm, the reason that worked is because Dylan, most great founders I know are relentless about getting as much help as they can. They'll get as much help as they can from investors, from the board, from their friends. They're just ask and ask and ask and ask and ask, and they'll collect as much as they can. And Dylan was good at that. Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, he was an advisor and a friend. John Doerr, one of the best investors of all time, was an advisor, a friend. And so that was part of it. So there are objective things I could look at. For me personally, it was in a domain that I understood a lot. So design. So I had been working on design since the 90s, like I said, at Stanford. And I looked, since 1985, every year there's been a new company. They call themselves the Adobe killer. And Adobe's pretty robust. It's pretty strong still. It's like a $200 billion company. But this is the first one. And if you remember, there was something like Sketch at the time that was building an app, but that was kind of basically just like Photoshop. And even though a lot of people were using it, and Dylan could see it in different ways, like, well, what if we do this in a browser? And what if we do a different thing? And so he was thinking about it I was talking about network effects earlier. So Dylan was starting to think about, well, what happens if design is collaborative, which is kind of what I was looking for too. And then I started thinking about, well, if I take the lessons I learned from Instagram and from Mozilla and all these, like, how do you build network effects inside software, and if I can bring that to Dylan and help him think about how design can spread that way, well, that's an explosive potential. And that turned out to be true. But even beyond that, with Dylan, I just found him to be curious and energetic and enthusiastic and obviously hyper smart, but also non-defensive. So, you know this about me. I'm a little bit of an acquired taste as somebody to work with, because I only have one gear, that I only say exactly what I think kind of all the time, which hurts people's feelings. Like Reed got sick of me telling him about what a crappy UI LinkedIn had all the time, for example. And but with Dylan, I would tell him, it's definitely true, but it also didn't matter because they had such a strong network effect.
Yeah.
And so that's what he mostly tells me. He's like, you're right, but who cares?
Right.
So kind of like I told Dylan. But with Dylan, I could tell him, like, I don't think this is very good, or I think you're wrong about this, or I think you're right about this. And And over time, he sucked it all up. He just wanted to get better and wanted to learn, and he could take the feedback and get better. I mean, there's this, a few years later, me and Danny Reimer from Index, the other first early investor in Figma, we had a lunch with Dylan where he was kind of failing because he was kind of scared of building a go-to-market and started building a sales team. And we had lunch with him. It's like, Dylan, look, if you want to be a great CEO, like you got to get a good go-to-market. And so like you got to figure out how to be best in the world at this problem. And again, I think that was like a shock to his system because it was a hard lunch, but he wanted to get better. And so that non-defensiveness and that desire to get better and the desire, like willingness to get out of your comfort zone, it's all those things together. Plus, I mean, and then more fundamentally, like had been at Greylock for 4 or 5 years, and I just wanted to work with people that I liked on projects that I liked on journeys and be in the boat with them. And Dylan was somebody I wanted to be in the boat with. I thought he could go long, but I wanted to be on the journey either way.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying captures the founders that actually make it are the ones that are relentless, that are just so curious, that want to learn, that want to get better. They're open. They'll do whatever it takes. It's the business first. It's not their ego. And there's just like this, I don't know, this like drive that,
Yeah.
nothing else matters. Like, okay, I want to hear all the hard stuff. They want that. And they
Yeah. I mean,
surround themselves with people that give it to them.
yeah, that's right. I mean, I think you get to a certain stage and everybody, you become like a successful executive and people stop telling you the truth and that becomes hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's what makes this moment in technology pretty weird because like companies have never been able to scale faster than they are now, but they're also able to get threatened by people who can write software over a weekend. And so there's
Yeah.
this crazy like, growth, but vulnerability, like collision that's happening now.
John, when
It's nuts.
Well,
Go ahead.
I want to get into that, but I wanted to ask John one question because you've worn so many hats, and I want to talk a little bit about you and not only what you've learned from supporting founders, but what you learned as being a founder and being a CEO yourself. And I'll follow it up with like, what's been your favorite hat to wear?
That's a good question. I don't know. I just like being around smart people and who give a damn. And I guess I don't care too much about the position on the field you're playing so some, like right now I'm an advisor to some things and on the board of sports some things. And I teach. Before I've been an operator and have led. I'm not sure I could be a CEO right now. I think it's hard to be a CEO right now, but also like I'm coding lately. I'm building products now too, just because AI makes it so easy and so much fun to build. So for me, it's just about like, it's less about the role, less about the job, and more about like, how can I be around people who are awesome and care?
Yeah. What was the biggest lesson coming out of Mozilla for you? Like what that ride? Because it was pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, Mozilla, we went from nothing to core of the internet pretty quick. I mean, I learned a lot of things. Like that was my introduction to open source. So I learned a lot about open source. It was a nonprofit because Mitchell and Brendan started it because they felt like the internet shouldn't be owned by any corporation. So there were some value system things that came out of that for me that were pretty important. I still think that we should bias towards open and we should bias towards more public benefit stuff than some of the profit taking that's happening. I'm super capitalist, but I also think that, how much money do you need really? And so those things, I learned a lot about being international and growing. I learned a lot about, I really liked having users all over the world you could talk to and had different points of view about what mattered in the software you're building. I mean, a lot of those things, I take a lot of those lessons to everything I do really. But I think that just like trying to build something that works for people is the main thing. Mozilla is in a different spot now. I think it's been overtaken by events in a lot of ways. So I want Mozilla to be strong, but it's in a hard spot.
Yeah. And what about that experience shaping you as a leader yourself?
Yeah, so that's my second time as a CEO. So I've been a CEO of my startup that we eventually sold to Cisco, and I was CEO there. There are a lot of things. I had to learn how to be simpler in my messages as we grew. We were never huge. We were 500 people, 500 people and $100 million in revenue, but 400 million users, something like that. And for me, yeah, I think as we scaled, I had to learn how to be a little bit more extroverted, how to be a little bit better at listening. People say, as you get bigger, you need to learn how to delegate and not micromanage. That's not a lesson that I took. I think that good leaders do micromanage all the time. And I think micromanaging the right things is a really important thing, because it like gives you gives the organization clues to what you should really care about. And, Jeff, you maybe know this story better than I do, but my understanding is that Larry and Sergey, reviewed every resume for like maybe the first 10,000 hires at
That's my
Google.
understanding. I wasn't
And
there, obviously, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, it's
yeah, but
It's
that's
same
an
story I've
amazing,
gotten. Yeah.
yeah, that's an amazing thing to do, first of all, but it's also amazing message to give. Like, the message is nothing matters more than getting the right people. And like, what a great way to live. They also famously did all hands every Friday, as long as I knew, in the company, and where they'd take questions from anybody in the company, and they'd answer them pretty honestly. And that gives you, clues about how to be open. And so I took a lot of lessons from that
So,
kind
John,
of leadership too.
Right.
in this day and age, I mean, it's kind of always been the case, I think, as long as I've been in tech, but it seems like it's even more prevalent now. It's hard to keep great people in companies because they're all free agents. They all try to go to the place that's building the more interesting products, theoretically going to make them more money. When you look at your companies today, how do you coach them around that as a board member? Like, what should they be thinking?
Yeah, well, obviously it's been a complicated time. Like, for a couple of years here, OpenAI sucked all the talent out of the world, and then now Anthropic is doing it. Everybody is pulled by the lure of dollars and payouts, and like, these numbers are so big now that it's hard to ignore those things. For me, almost, I think, years ago, like 20 years ago, like Harvard Business School came over to visit Mozilla, and they were really puzzled about Mozilla being a nonprofit. They're like, you can't pay people stock, and like, why would anyone come here to work? And I'm like, well, like, why don't you think about the last 20 decisions you made? Like, which ones were made purely about how much you got paid? And like, how many decisions in your life are purely about how many things you get paid, how much dollars you make? And so what I encourage people to do is think about why they make the decisions they make. And economics are sometimes primary and sometimes not. But for every, Figma or Duolingo or any of the companies I'm involved with now, I encourage them to have a spreadsheet of everyone, their directs and their directs, and just say, okay, here's that person, and here's how they're doing here's my perspective of how they're doing. Here's what I think they want over the next year or two, and here's how I think they're getting it or not getting it. And then here's a plan to make sure that we can give them what they want, and they can give the company what we want. And so it's really just it's a little bit like Reed talks about in his first book, The Startup of You. Like, here's a tour of duty. The tour of duty in a company is like this exchange of value. The person's going to do this. The person's going to commit to this to the company. The company's going to commit to this to the employee. And we're going to do our best to make that a bilateral relationship. We're going to help them grow. They're going to help us grow. Well, good. And if that breaks down, that's no good. Like, we're going to try to do the best we can. If they can get a better deal somewhere else, then let's look at it. Let's talk about why they think that's a better deal. Let's talk about why that makes sense. But maybe it does make more sense for them to go leave. It definitely doesn't make sense for them to stay if they feel like they get a better deal somewhere else. And so let's just talk about it and be open.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing to do. And most companies don't do that. Yeah.
But I learned this from you, Jeff. Like, I always learn, it's like, well, when you're making somebody an offer, you should talk and say, all right, here's the offer I'm going to make you. Are you ready? Are you ready to receive the offer? Let's talk about. And so I just learned from you, like, how do you be
ready
open?
to accept
How do you
an offer
talk it through? Like, yeah. Yeah. So now I never make people an offer until I'm sure they're going to accept it.
Yeah. That's the way to do it.
It's an interesting time, especially for companies that, quote unquote, are incumbents and, have been building software and call it traditional ways. And now all of a sudden you have AI and it's impacting a lot of companies, not to talk specifically about, a Figma or any other of your companies, but I believe leadership is leadership. But the way a leader has to approach it when they're getting attacked is interesting. So how do you think about that? And what have you seen?
So you're talking about like a wartime
Yeah, is it,
kind of
yeah, maybe
mentality.
it's wartime. I don't know if it's wartime. I think it's an interesting time where companies have to think.
Well, if you're getting
Yeah, that's
attacked,
true.
yeah.
I think we're in a very volatile time. So I think that for 20 years before this, I think we were pretty stable. You can argue cloud or mobile were big innovations, and I do argue that. But like basically software in 1995 works the same way as it did in, call it 2020. Ups and downs, some booms, like some little, mobile was big, iPhone's pretty big, COVID really changed things for a minute, but all things kind of work the same. Now it doesn't work like that at all. So now I feel like we are in a time when everything's moving around. This class I teach at Stanford, we talk about how you build organizations for startups. And, we used to kind of focus around, well, here's what you do with an organization of 100 people. Here's what an organization of 1,000 people. So here's the size of the organization kind of scales with the size of impact. Now it doesn't. You can have AI write your software. You can scale with only a few people. You can have a lot of automated learning loops. And so I think everything is up for grabs. And so what I think leadership now requires is stability and clarity and message while also understanding that nothing is particularly stable. And so I think that the job for leadership is like, well, what are our North Stars? What are the things we care about? What are the things we know? And what are all the things that we don't know? And what are all the things that we act like we know, but maybe don't know? What are the processes that we run that kind of like are a little bit too static? And so it's all about like providing people enough of a stable field to play on so they don't feel like every day is totally different in work, but also recognizing that every day kind of is a little different at work. And so it's like, how do you balance those two things? And like I said earlier, I don't know that I could be a CEO right now. I think it's a tough set of things to hold in your head, especially for, the bulk of the workforce who might be in their 20s or 30s. And, I think to them, everything looks shifting.
Yeah, what would be, other than what you just mentioned, if the CEO, in your portfolio is coming to you today, what are you telling them?
Well, I don't tell CEOs anything. I think CEOs are way smarter than investors. And I'm an investor and board member, and I show up and I try to be helpful. And mostly what I do is I reflect back to them what they already tell me. So mostly like a CEO will come and we'll talk about things. They'll say, I'm kind of worried about this for these reasons and that reasons. And it feels like we should do this. But like almost all I do is say, well, it sounds to me like you want to do this. It sounds to me like what you're telling me is you're going to do this set of things. And then I can say, that makes sense to me. Or I can say, well, in what I've heard you say, like, I don't quite hear the justification, or it doesn't hang together to me. Or you said these things and then you said, therefore I'm going to do X, and that doesn't make that doesn't logically follow. And so mostly what I do is I try to reflect back to them. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
55-year-old like investor guy. Like, what do I know about like, solid state transformers like the company we invested in recently at Gigascale, or, copper recycling or what have you. So I don't know any of that stuff, and I'll never know any of that stuff as well as the entrepreneurs who are in it. But I can listen to them and I can reflect back to them what they're saying. And I can say, well, in my experience, when it's been hard to hire, here's a trick I did or whatever. But I don't tell them many things other than I think just I try to teach as many people as I can, and myself included, is how do you be intellectually honest with yourself? How do you make sure you're trying to expose your biases? Jeff and my friend Sarah Guo has a podcast called No Priors. And I think that's a good thing too, which is like, we'll try to live with no prior conceptions about how the world is. Like, you're trying to learn.
I think
all the
for
time.
the
Mhm,
audience
mhm.
and Jessica, I've known John for a long time. I think he's being very humble. I've seen a lot of investors and board members, and it's very easy to see that the companies that John invests in, those founders really look up to John. They do. And I think yes, you tell them directly, but you tell them directly with a soul. And I think there are too many people out there that tell people things directly without a soul. And I think that distinction is very important. So I'll just,
Well, I appreciate it, Jeff. I mean, it's very mutual. I feel mutually about you. Like, the companies that I get involved with, things like Duolingo or Figma, I just feel really lucky to be involved with them. The missions are awesome. Figma is like make design, make everyone able to design. Duolingo's like help educate the world. The founders are very committed to the mission. The founders are very talented. And so for me, I just want them to succeed on these missions. And so whatever I can do to help, that's the thing I want to do.
Yeah. Well, if, Jeff's now back at Greylock, I'm at TCV, you've been in the investing world. It's so interesting and fun and wild. It's a little overwhelming, at times, just all the things that are going on, just from, a company can like displace somebody over a weekend by, vibe coding, right? I'm starting to learn how to code too. It's all very interesting because I've been around engineers my entire life, but I've never coded, and I think it's so fun. But from an investment perspective, what's the lens that you would be applying?
Well, I have two different ways that I invest now. So one is I do angel investing, and that's mostly things that come from friends and other people are involved in, and especially if it's like adjacent to areas that I'm interested in around, developing or coding or building or web or things like that. And so I do angel investing. My day job is I'm an advising partner at a firm called Gigascale, which is a new firm. It's a $250 million fund started by my friend Mike Schrepfer, who was the CTO of Meta for a long time. I've known Mike for a long time, since 1994, 95. And so we're doing investing in physical economy stuff. So solid state transformers. So a guy spun out of Tesla and is building these huge transformers for data centers that are digital, and it's going to be the new set of power electronics for the world. Or materials, so a company called Red Metals or Solcoa. So Red Metals is a copper recycling, or Solcoa is like a rare earth metal processing company to build the rare earth supply chain back in America. There's a robotics company called Rhoda we're investing in. So if you look at the world now, software is becoming easier and easier to make. And so it's more like, well, what do you want to do with the software you're making? Mike's point of view is, as he started the fund with the partners, Evelyn and Victoria, was like, look, we can do these things better, cleaner, smarter, like electric cars at some level. Like there are superior ways to build things now that are also better for the planet. And so you fast forward to now, I think we announced fund last month, month before. We're just doing things like, how do you invest in energy, like data center energy, data center power, materials, things like that. So for me, this is amazing and fascinating because I don't know anything about any of this stuff. And so now I can just help other investors learn how to do what I said, which is like find good founders, reflect back to the founders what they really know what to do already. How can we help build a firm that way? And so that's been interesting. It's hard because like software had a certain there by 2023, 24, there's a certain cookie cutter nature to the way you do software. It's getting easier and like well understood. This stuff is not well understood and not cookie cutter at all. And so, it's fascinating. It's amazing to look at and think about. And I can look back at how some of the ways the enterprise software, one of these things it did is it evolved an ecosystem of follow-on financings. A guy named Doug Leone at Sequoia figured out how to do that stuff 20, 30 years ago. And now you're just like, well, how do we do that in climate or energy? And so thinking about how to apply that stuff has been pretty fun to me. And it's, I still like photo sharing apps and I still like design software. I still like stuff we screw around with on our phones. So I consume a lot of content like soccer and TV and all that other stuff. So I still like all the trivial stuff, but I also like this
Yeah.
hard economy things.
Speaking of soccer, did you see that Germany Paraguay match yesterday?
I've watched all the matches,
Then?
all of
That
them,
was in.
All right.
90%.
Impressive.
Wow.
I like soccer.
That
It's
is
fun.
impressive. That match was crazy. A lot of upsets happening.
There was a lot of people worried that with 48 teams and expanding, the teams would be worse. But I think what's happened over the last decade is that people understand that because you can watch videos from around the world. Like I think the sophistication around coaching has gotten a lot better, and then the fitness levels of a lot of the athletes have gotten a lot better. So there's still the top people like Mbappe and Messi. They're
Yeah.
like clearly superior, but everybody else the world's gotten better, and that's killer. And this U.S. team's fun too. I'm going to go to that game tomorrow.
Fun. Well, who's going to win? What's your prediction?
it'll probably be France or Argentina is my guess.
Okay. Not US, you don't think?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Well, we are running out of time, which I'm really sad about because this has been fascinating. We put our guest under a little bit of pressure, and we ask you to leave the listeners with a bit of inspiration for their week. So, here I'm going to ask you, what's your gift that you want to give them as far as inspiration goes today?
Yeah, so there's the guy Mike Shaver, who I worked with at Mozilla. He's like our head of engineering, and he was from with Mozilla project since the beginning, since it didn't matter. And what he said to me one time is like, "Look, we got a chance to make the world that we wanted, and we did it." And so that's, I think, the thing I would encourage people to think about now, which is like, I think we're living in this like fairly defeatist era, like of technology determinism, where it feels like Dario or Sam or Sundar are calling all the shots. Like those guys are in charge. They're going to define what we get and how AI works and all that stuff. And what I would say is that none of this is settled. It's all to play for. And so things that look sure one day turn out not to be sure the next day. And so I would just encourage everybody to, well, do what you're doing, which is like learn how to vibe code, learn how to do these things, learn how to make, and then try to figure out like what does the world you want look like and figure out how to make that. And so I would encourage everybody to do that. It just feels more possible than ever, even though there are these big companies that are running fast too.
I love it. That's such good inspiration. And if our listeners want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Hmm.
John
LinkedIn?
has a profile.
Oh,
Even though since you love the UI.
I don't know. I used to tweet all the time. I don't tweet so much.
You were
I still
prolific.
call it Twitter.
I know, but I have not figured it out. Do you call it I'm Xing or because I feel like you still say you're tweeting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's depressing. I don't, you can, Twitter is probably the best. I'm just John O'Lilly at Twitter, and that probably links to my blog and stuff like that, which I don't write as much as I used to, but kids have getting in the way of that stuff.
Yeah, I know. They really put a wrench in plans,
It's take a lot of
especially in the summer.
A lot of
They
time, yeah.
How old are your kids now?
Oh, 21 and 14, so they're getting up there.
Yeah. Well, John,
Thank you,
so
John.
much for coming on the show. And I learned a ton. Jeff apparently did a lot of research on you, even though he knows you. But I think because Jeff was the one that got you to come on. So we're just so appreciative. And I know our listeners are going to love all the gifts that you gave today.
It was fun. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and good conversation.
You
Good.
too,
Nice to see you,
John.
Jeff.